truth.
Logic, common sense, that gut feeling, and yes, even a little psychoanalysis. As we are once again together, you and I. We are once again together, you and I, to talk about this Melody Farris. And KJ's been dipping in and out of this trial that's been going on in Georgia for some time. As many of you know, in one of my live streams, I said I had watched more of the Melody Farris trial than I had Laloney Simon or Sarah Boone combined. So I've been over at the docket, which is at Eric's channel there, and really listening to all the comments. I've been surfing all over the place on YouTube just to get everyone's different opinions about what they think. Y'all, this case, this is a truly whodunit in terms of the people that were all involved in this family. And any way you look at it, today they are in deliberations. They've been in deliberations basically for about really a day, because the first day they only deliberated for about an hour. Second day for maybe, 3 or 4 hours. And then today, I think the judge said something about going to a funeral. And so I was like, well, you know, what can I do, right? Right? What can I do to get a little justice through understanding, huh? What can old KJ learn about this Melody Farris case out of Georgia? But before I go into that, I just want to say hello to Fancy Nancy, Bama Cat, I Live For Now, Tina Reddington, Kathy Mama Bear, you have Monique Dawn, Stephanie Willow, and others are coming in. It's the Ferris wheel, says Bama Cat. Yes, that's a really good way to look at it, isn't it? But I want to go at this with a little logic and common sense, okay? Because the way that the state of Georgia has presented this case and what Melody Farris's defense team has tried to do in terms of pointing their finger at Scott Farris, I just thought, well, let's just look at this common sense wise, right? Let's just look at it like that. First question right out of the gate, okay? Simple question. Why would the state of Georgia bring a case against Melody Farris and not bring any case at all against Scott Farris or anyone else for that matter? Rusty Barton, Melody's lover there, or anything like that. Why is it that they are only bringing this case against Melody Farris, right? That's a good question to kind of, chew on a little bit. And for all of those out here in the crime genre community that are following the Melody Farris case, for all those that say Scott Farris actually did it, well, do you think that law enforcement didn't look at every possible theory as they continued to gather all that evidence, issued all those warrants for cell phones, GPS, all of those things? They looked at probably every way you could look at how this could happen. That Gary Farris was shot and put into a burn pile, okay? So I believe that the state of Georgia absolutely had enough circumstantial evidence to charge Melody Farris the way they did. And they didn't have any evidence against Scott Farris. Now, for those that have been listening to this trial and all of the evidence and stuff, you know Melody Farris told Rusty Barton that Scott, he had the perfect crime, right? So what does that say? What does that say? That Scott Farris, he thought all this up, or he didn't. It was last minute or whatever, but after he'd done it, he just very quickly figured out ways to plant evidence and do all these things. What evidence leading up to the murder? Okay, think about this. Stop and think. the days before the murder, and you can even include the whole history of the Ferris wheel if you'd like, all the way back when she first cheated on her husband, when she started cheating, you know, and they were split up, back together, and all. You can look at all that, y'all, you want, but I want you to look at the days preceding that were before the murder, of the behaviors of any of these people, okay? Scott Farris, Melody Farris. Because really, if you look at it, any of the other children or any of the neighbors or anything like that, there's no way that it could possibly be any of them. So let's chisel it down to Scott Farris and Melody Farris, okay? What were their behaviors pointing to a healthy legal inference that this was going to happen? Now, OKJ is going to kind of jump all over the place about my theory, but I will start off by saying I do not believe this was a cold and calculated, premeditated, like down to the nitty-gritty plan. But I do believe that Melody Farris had been thinking about these things, and she didn't share these things with other people. You know, she knew, and she had a problem with Gary Farris going down there and burning stuff all the time. So she knew about that. She also knew that he had these spells, whether any of y'all want to believe she was slowly poisoning him or not, whether anyone wants to add credence to the fact that she was telling her lover that he had esophagus cancer or whatever, that is a totally different issue. The point I'm trying to make is that Melody Farris absolutely had been thinking of different ways. And you know, it all started when he went into the hospital. I know she made a big deal out of it to everyone. He ended up coming home and all of that. But before he went into the hospital, there had always been, since she got back together with him after cheating, when he cut her off and wouldn't put her on the accounts, she'd already complained and did not like the fact that she didn't have the kind of access that she had before she cheated on him. So when he went into the hospital, this exacerbated it, made it worse. She's like, well, you know, what if he dies? And y'all, make no mistake, these children of Melody and Gary Farris, they had to have at least at some point thought, what's going to happen down the road? What's going to happen down the road? How's this all going to get worked out? So, keeping in mind Melody Farris and Scott Farris, think about where Scott Farris was. He was on this farm that they had. He had a home there at the apartment. Yes, he was getting money from his father and all that. His father was not so threatened by hot-tempered Scott that he was able to call Scott out for stealing money or anything like that. And really, look at it like this. Was there ever any altercations with Scott and Gary, or even Melody for that matter, where police had to be called in because Scott had lost his temper and they got into a fist fight or something like that? Nothing like that had ever occurred. Nobody is saying that Scott Farris was not hot-tempered. What I'm trying to say is that Scott absolutely ran his mouth, got loud, was rude to neighbors and all of that stuff. But nobody ever kicked Scott out of there for doing something wrong to Gary or Melody. And in fact, Scott was the one that they turned to help them do all kinds of things. So whether or not you want to put credence to the fact that Scott Farris had a temper, you have to look at the background and say, okay, yes, they had testimony of neighbors who said, Scott scared me and Scott got loud with me. He was so rude. Scott wanted to know why people were on the property, you know, just loudmouth, hateful, all these things. But there was never anything in there where Scott Farris was verbally abusing Gary on text message, or any kind of evidence of testimony where someone said that Scott and Gary got into a fist fight, or Scott and Melody got in a fist fight, or something to that effect. So how could I mean, you think of all this is a big trial that there was a lot of evidence presented, and I can't sit here and go over every single aspect and how that would fit into my theory of what actually happened to Gary Farris, okay? What I do want to do is learn something, and hopefully y'all want to learn something too. This motive means an opportunity. We've heard it in the crime genre community time and time again. And we pretty well think we know what that means. But we're going to look at it logically, common sense. Let's start off with motive, okay? Here is the definition of motive. A reason for doing something, especially one that is hidden or is not obvious. Now, let's stop and think about Melody Farris and Scott Farris. Did they have a motive to kill Gary? All right? Did Scott want to shoot his father dead and throw his body in a burn pile? Did Melody Farris, did she want to shoot her husband and throw his body in a burn pile? The motive, a reason for doing something. Okay, well, Scott Farris didn't have a reason at all to kill his father because everything was what it was. I mean, his whole life pretty much depended on living on that farm. I know there was testimony where Gary Farris told Scott, well, things are about to get real. You're going to need to get a job and all this stuff. But would that have made Scott want to shoot his father? And really, this goes back again to no matter what, if people theorize that Scott got home that night and got in a fight, he went over to the house because Melody called him up at Lake Lanier and said the horses were out, and he gets home, the horses were back in, and it pissed him off because he had to come home, and he goes in their house, and Gary and Melody and him are there, or him and Gary are there, but Melody's upstairs making a bed with sheets, and she doesn't have any idea that Gary and Scott are arguing upstairs because, y'all, this goes back to the blood trail. Somehow Scott just had that gun ready, and he shot his dad, and his dad went downstairs. Y'all, it makes no sense at all. Scott Farris would not have murdered his father. He would not have done that. Y'all, think about it like this. Scott Farris was pretty well dependent on his mother and father for where he lived, for the money that they gave him, whether you think that's right or wrong, that a grown man should ask his parents for money. But who hated that? Did Gary hate that? Did Melody hate that? Melody hated it every time Gary gave money to the siblings, to his children, because she couldn't get a hold of it herself. So a reason for doing something, especially one that is hidden or not obvious, the day before, and the state of Georgia contends that the murder happened July 3rd, overnight there, sometime around 10 or 12, something like that, was that a reason for doing something, especially one that's hidden or not so obvious, you would have to believe that somehow Scott just came home, had a hot temper, didn't think about what was going to happen there, and that his mom would find out or anything like that. We'll get to this cahoot stuff, whether Melody and Scott were in it together. But let's just, for this little vein of thinking here, Scott would have shot his dad. Melody didn't hear anything. Somehow Scott went and took the dad, however that happened, y'all. Took him over to the burn pile. He would have had to do it with the tractor, whether it was taking it out of the house or the barn. He would have had to put him in the burn pile. He would have stoked that fire or whatever, put him in the burn pile, and Melody Farris would have never heard or saw anything at all. But Melody Farris did have a reason for what she did, and I believe she did it. This is my theory, and it's going to be a little unjoined a little bit, but this is how I see it. I believe that Gary came home after eating dinner. They got into an argument. She got the gun. She'd already had the gun ready. She knew where it was at. And she shot him. Miss Kitty. Go on. I got to let Miss Kitty out, y'all. She's going to keep meowing if I don't. Come on. Come on. Sorry, y'all. It's the life of having a cat. And she would sit here and meow and meow and meow. Anyway, she did not sit there and premeditate. Per se, she didn't. She didn't know that it was going to get out of hand like it did. But I do believe that she absolutely took that gun and shot him, not thinking, that he was going to be able to run down the stairs or do any of that. That's what I think. But we'll have to move forward for me to continue with that theory. So now we get to the means, okay? The means, an action, y'all. Think about Melody Farris and Scott Farris, okay? An action by which a result is brought about. An action by which a result is brought about, and it can be a method. Melody Farris absolutely knew that something had to happen in order for her to be able to gain access of the money. If they would have went through a divorce, that would have been a different. She didn't want to go through a divorce. She didn't want to have to fight over all that stuff. But think about it from Scott Farris's point of view. His dad's been in the hospital. He gets out. Scott Farris is like, well, what's going to happen down the road? Melody and Gary are fighting constantly. Perhaps Scott Farris said they're heading toward the divorce. She's going to get half of everything according to Georgia law. Let's keep going. But it's an action by which a result is brought about. And this is just a theory, her action was that I believe it, just very upset, very passionate about everything. She said the day before, I've had it. I'm going to stop this. This is the last straw. What could she have done other than that? Think about that, okay? Melody Farris says the day before, this is the last straw. What was she going to do besides murder him? What was she going to do? Have a fight with him on the night of the July 3rd? Confront him? They get into a big fight? What was she going to do? Say, that's the last straw, Gary. I'm divorcing you. Because that would have been the only thing she would have done, right? Aside from shooting him. What is it that she thought that somehow she was going to be able to get through to Gary about giving money to the kids? This is the last straw? What could she have done to stop Gary? Gary wasn't going to listen to her. He wasn't going to listen to her. So it had to be something really. Maybe she even took the gun and wanted him to hear her. And then things got out of hand and she shot him. Or she wanted him to hear her and they got into a big argument and it just threw her over the edge. It was far beyond her breaking a plate and just freaking out and everything. And she just shot him because she knew that burn pile was already going. She knew he had health issues where there was evidence that he had spells. And she was going to chalk it off that he was down there at the burn pile. And we'll get to that in a minute that kind of lines up with that. And that's how she was going to do it. And the opportunity, okay? So we've talked about the motive, the means, and the opportunity. A set of circumstances that makes it possible to do something. All right, she knew that Gary was at dinner somewhere that night on the 3rd. She knew that nobody was home but her. She knew Scott wasn't there. And she didn't even really, she knew how long it would take Scott to get back from Lake Lanier. So for her to call at 10:40 something to say the horses are out, I believe that Gary came home, they got into an argument, she shot him, he ran, he went downstairs, she shot him again, and he died somewhere downstairs, and people don't realize that, what, a 300-pound man, how's she supposed to get him down to the burn pile? Well, there's a door that goes out downstairs. It's the actual door that leads outside down in Gary's section of the house, where Gary actually took a video, the day before he was murdered, showing this plate that was smashed everywhere. She was used to going out that door. It ain't like she never used that door. She went down there and smashed that plate the day before he died. It's a set of circumstances that make it possible to do something. Well, she was going to do something. And she was going to make sure that the life insurance, the accidental aspects of the insurance would pay off. She also knew there was no will. And if it looked like an accident that Gary fell in the fire, she thought that perhaps, they would never look to see that it was a bullet in him. Melody Farris's DNA, y'all, was identified on the L2 shifter of the Kubota tractor and one blue shoe inside the home. Now let's stop about the Melody Farris DNA on the tractor. I did not hear any testimony where she was always on that tractor. That Gary Farris was on that tractor and perhaps Scott was on that tractor, but they found Melody Farris's DNA on the shifter. Melody Farris and her son Scott Farris had their hands swabbed for fire accelerants. Both tests were negative, but she had plenty of time to clean up because, folks, they didn't really, the time had passed. No one started looking for Gary till the July 5th. According to the cell phone records presented to the jury, Gary Farris left his home at 8:28 p.m. on July 3rd of 2018 and headed to a nearby restaurant. He stayed at the restaurant until 9:21 p.m. Gary Farris's phone is moving toward his home from 9:26 p.m. and 9:32 p.m. Melody Farris calls her son Scott at 10:52 p.m., needing help rounding up the farm animals who had broken free from their enclosures. Scott Farris arrives home at 11:30 p.m. and calls his mother after realizing the animals were back in the pasture and he saw the burn pile burning. On July 4th of 2018, data points show, y'all, Gary Farris's cell phone is moving around the property beginning at 5:52 a.m. through his last phone activity at 6:24 p.m. Right? Scott Farris called his mother to pick up the debit card at 6:12 a.m., returns home to give the debit card back to his mother, and leaves for his 7 a.m. tea time at a nearby golf course. Now let's stop. If Melody Farris and Scott Farris did this overnight, because, folks, it happened. They're showing the CPAP machine was used and that it hadn't been used anymore after that. It hadn't been used, that night. So the bottom line is he wouldn't have went without his CPAP machine. On top of that, you're looking at Melody Farris's calls between 1 and 2 in the morning telling Rusty Barton he's on the burn pile, right? What I am saying is that you would have to believe if Melody Farris and Scott Farris were in this cahoots together, that somehow he didn't get the credit card from her after putting the body on there and, we got it done. Now we just need to continue to, pretend that we don't know where he's at or whatever. You would think that he wouldn't have to get up very early in the morning, Scott Farris, to go over there and knock on the door to get the credit card. But the testimony has been that this is how they always were. This is the behaviors of how they all operated in terms of credit cards and stuff. So Scott Farris, he absolutely, if he was in cahoots with Melody Farris, then he wouldn't have had to go over there at that early in the morning to get that credit card. And think about it like this. If he knew, oh, I killed Daddy, or me and Melody killed Daddy, why would they want it showing that Scott Farris went and got that credit card, went to an ATM and came back, and on top of it all, y'all, Melody Farris gets the credit card back from him after he gets the money out and goes to his golf thing, and she goes to Walmart for cleaning supplies. But what does she do, y'all? She absolutely buys minutes for that burner phone that Gary Farris did not know anything about. And he always got alerts on his phone. And so she didn't care. She didn't care. So what if Melody Farris didn't know that Gary Farris was dead and Scott did this all by himself? Why would she want, if she thought Gary was still alive, why would she want to show that purchase? Why would she want to show that purchase? Do you think that Melanie Scott ever thought about the future of their financial situation? You think they ever did? Do you think Scott thought, I'm going to inherit this farm after Daddy dies? Do you think Melody Farris thought everything's going to be okay? I'm going to be okay after Gary dies? And we're not talking about through murder. We're talking about old age. And then we get to, and I'm sorry I'm jumping around, but this is a very complicated, complex case, but I'm trying to put it in the vein of motive, means, and opportunity. The means. Scott had guns. It was in testimony. The defense tried to say, you know, he had a gun stolen in another state. That could have been the gun. Or he had another gun that could shoot the same bullets and all that. Well, then if he used a gun that he had that could shoot the same bullets, then why is it that a bullet found downstairs didn't match up with any bullets that he had at all? And wouldn't he have gotten rid of those bullets? And Melody Farris absolutely in her police interview talked about how Scott there was guns around the barn, and she knew all about the guns. But then we get to what? Martha Jane. Melody knew there was a gun in at Martha Jane's because Martha Jane testified that Melody knew about it, and if for nothing else, Rusty knew about it. And why would she put that gun, if that was indeed the murder weapon, okay? When Scott Farris testifies that he saw a gun in a drawer downstairs in Gary's part of the thing in a leather holster, why would it be there? Okay? Why would Melody Farris put a gun downstairs in Gary's living area down there? I mean, wouldn't she think that Gary would know about it, would find it? I mean, Scott was looking for a remote when he found it, saw it in the drawer there. Wouldn't Gary at some point or another say, what's this gun doing down here, Melody? That's something that's a little strange to me. But she knew there was a gun downstairs in the drawer, if you want to believe that's the gun. Martha Jane's gun. If that's what if the inference is that's the gun that murdered Gary Farris, she knew that gun was downstairs. She could have went downstairs before Gary got home, got the gun, brought it upstairs. Y'all, I'm stuck on this trail of blood down the stairs because part of me says that perhaps she went downstairs to get in a fight with him that night when he got back from eating and knew the gun was in the drawer, took it out, shot him, and that maybe the blood trail he tried to get away to go upstairs. Thus, It's the regular level up there. It's, she could have easily rode him out the front door or anywhere else. She could have took the sheet from upstairs. So, but who shot Gary and why? Who would get so upset that they would shoot Gary Farris? Would Scott lose his temper so much that he would shoot Gary? Now let's look at it like this. How about Gary came back and instead of going in the house, he went over to the barn. But folks, Scott didn't get home till 11:30 that night. So when Gary gets home, Gary would want to go home. And then when Scott got home and the animals are inside and all of that, there's nothing going on, that he's going to leave and go over to the barn because the defense wants to throw it out there that they didn't do any Blue Star luminol test in the barn. And the defense is talking about Scott's bathroom was so clean, but the rest of it was awful and blah, 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 blah. Well, let's look at that. Why would Gary go out to the barn? First of all, he comes home and the phone shows he's at home, and Scott doesn't get home until after Gary would have been at home. Why would Gary leave to go over there to the barn at 11:30 at night? And Melody not know nothing about it. Gary's just going to go over there. Melody's upstairs. What is she? She's in there making beds. She's up there doing whatever she's doing. But Scott, in his testimony, says he got home, noticed the animals were all taken care of. That, it probably pissed him off. He's like, she's calling me to get the horses in. I get home, they're all fine. He goes in the house, goes over there to him and says, what's this all about? Why'd you have me come home if the animals are already put up? And in his testimony, he says she was laying in bed downstairs. The barn is out, y'all, because Gary Farris wouldn't have went out there. They didn't find any evidence of any drag marks or anything like that. What they focused in on was the evidence, which was the blood. Some people say, well, KJ, a couple of days before this happened, he got bit by a dog. Do you think that Miss freaking anal retentive Melody Farris would have allowed blood down the stairs? She didn't have time to shampoo the little drops of blood on the stairs that were in the carpet. She didn't have time to do that. She tries to say to Rusty Barton, I saw no bullet or blood or anything. But yet, July 4th? As soon as Scott brings the debit card back, she's going to a Walmart that she doesn't tell police about and gets a shitload of bleach and cleaning supplies. Just so happens. It just so happens she's going on July the 4th, even though she's supposed to have plans to go to freaking this beach place with her daughter Amanda. She's not going to have time to clean or anything like that. She's got to have her alibi, so she doesn't have time. But a few days before, when Gary supposedly got bit by the dog, and people want to say, well, that's where the blood came from. Melody Farris didn't clean it up. Melody Farris missed the spot. Melody Farris missed a bullet that was on the floor. Oh, yeah. Scott just, out of a fit of rage, I shot and killed my father. Now I've got to make it look like my mother did it. So, I'm going to have to, let's see. I'm going to get up in the morning. I'm going to go as usual. I'm going to get the credit card from Mom. I'm going to get it from her. I'm going to go get money out of the bank. I'm going to come back, give her the credit card back, knowing that I killed my father and put his body on a bird pile. And I'm going to stay gone. That'll be my alibi. But somehow I'm going to come up with this idea before the 5th that we're going to take a bullet. What bullet? What bullet? A bullet that he shot earlier and put it in there in the basement? He thought about this beforehand or right after he killed his father, so I've got to have a bullet that matches the bullet that's in his rib. And I got to put it downstairs. I got to put it somewhere where Mom won't find it. Rad Joe says, I think the blood is from something else and Melody just missed it. Well, the blood on the bullet, I guess Scott must have taken a bullet, and before he threw his dad's body in the burn pile, he put his dad's blood on the bullet, because that's what he was going to do. That's what he's going to do. He's going to put that blood on that bullet, and and it's a shot bullet, by the way, and he's going to put it downstairs there. Yeah, and there's going to be a little indention on the floor, too. He's going to make sure to kind of, maybe take that bullet and press down on the floor real good, and it's going to be right there. I mean, he's going to make it look like Melody did this. Give me a break. Y'all think about that. Blood of Gary Farris on a spent bullet, and this was Scott's idea because he lost his temper and killed his father and disposed of him, and Melody never heard a gunshot, and Melody didn't know anything that was going on at all. Kathy Mama Bear says she shot him but didn't unalive him in the house and then led him at gunpoint to the burn pile and shot him fatally there. Well, I'll tell you what. That's as good a theory as any. But here's another question. Well, here's the question I want to repeat. Why would Gary Farris go to the barn after getting back from the restaurant if Scott Farris isn't there till 11:30? Gary Farris wants to stay up late that night and go over to the barn, get in a fight with Scott. Scott's going to shoot him dead. Scott's going to load his body up in the RTV or the tractor. Melody Farris ain't going to know nothing about it. And yet at the same damn time, Melody Farris is on the phone all night with fucking Rusty, excuse my French, Rusty Barton's telling him whatever they're talking about. She's awake, but somehow, some way, she doesn't hear a shot. She doesn't hear the tractor. She doesn't hear the RTV. And Rusty Barton is a liar when he says that, or he misunderstood her when he's on the burn pile. That was just Rusty Barton being scared out of his ass there. He's willing to lie for what? For what reason, y'all, would Rusty Barton lie to police? Right? Some would say, well, KJ, they gave him these fake warrants saying they could arrest him and all that. And so in his mind, oh gosh, I got to give him something even if it's a lie. Folks, the bottom line is it took Rusty Barton a whole freaking year with an attorney right there by his side the whole time to recant what he said. How does Rusty know that he can't get in trouble by the time he recants everything? How does he know that it's now safe to recant? Any time during that whole year, he could have recanted. Any time. But he stuck to it. And again, you have to look at the context of what Rusty actually said. He gave details. They weren't just going to say, oh, Rusty told us that Melody said on the phone that he's on the burn pile without some other corroboration that they could attach that to, because that's he said, she said shit. You know? Monique Dawn says, Rusty is a double agent. He told Melody taping conversation. Yeah, I mean, he told her that. And by the way, when Melody Farris told Rusty that I'm not taking up for Scott, I'm not covering for Scott, i.e., I wasn't involved. That's not that she's telling Rusty this stuff, right? Scott had the perfect crime and blah, blah, blah. She had already talked to Rusty the night of the murder and explained what actually happened. So when they're talking in the jail phone call, or the wiretap there where she says, well, he wasn't supposed to be burned up and it wasn't supposed to be damaged and all that. She's trying to come up, tell Rusty, because she knows Rusty knows that they've already talked about that the night of the murder. She's talking to Rusty where they both know that what she's saying is just, they're trying to get their story straight. She's trying to get her story straight. TC says, Rusty reminds me of James Brolin. If Melody didn't shoot Gary, okay, and Scott did, and Melody says to Rusty that Scott had the perfect crime, and then Scott does all that, moves the body that night, shoots him, moves the body, because he didn't shoot him in the house, because there's no way that Scott shot Gary in the house that Melody can say, I didn't hear a shot. I mean, this was her trying to talk to Rusty about, well, I've heard that if you put a gun straight up to somebody, up to their skin or whatever, and you shoot that you can't hear nothing. She's trying to figure out ways to be able to explain what, y'all? Why she didn't hear the shot in the house. Okay? And this is before her defense is talking about, y'all, look at the barn. They didn't blue star the barn. A year later, when her defense team starts putting her defense together. At the time she's saying this, she's trying to come up with a reason why she didn't hear the shot. Remember, she says, I went into the bathroom, and you can't hear nothing in the bathroom. She knows that Gary was shot in that house, not the barn. Think about that. If she say she didn't know nothing at all, nothing. She didn't know that Scott done this or anything. Don't you think she would have been talking about the barn, the barn, the barn? She never talked about the barn. It was always about, I was upstairs in the bathroom. I can't hear anything up there. If you put the gun right up to somebody, you can't hear the shot. She knew that Gary had been shot in the house, i.e., y'all, Melody Farris shot Gary in the house. Okay? She didn't have any concept in any of those calls with Rusty about it could have happened out at the barn, Rusty, or anything like that. She wasn't thinking about that because she knew that he had been shot in the house. And again, y'all, whether it was the barn, whether it was the house, but I'm telling you, Gary Farris got shot in that house. But let's just, for sake of argument, whether it was in the barn or the house, Melody Farris is on the phone with Rusty. She's wide awake all the way up till 2 o'clock in the morning. Okay? The bullet downstairs, y'all, there's no way that Scott Farris thought to dip Gary's blood in a spent bullet and where did he, when did he do this? Was this a really good elaborate plan of Scott Farris? Then you got the blood trail going downstairs. And this is where it's a little iffy for me because this is the way I look at it. I feel like she shot him upstairs and he ran downstairs. But if the gun was downstairs in the drawer, like Scott Farris said, she got in a fight with him downstairs and he tried to run up the stairs. And she was able to clean up upstairs better than going downstairs because y'all know what basements look like. They're a little darker. She just did not get those areas. She didn't have time to create her alibi. She couldn't do the Melody Farris anal retentive cleaning as she had done her whole life at that time. Again, you got the blood on the tractor that's belonging to Gary. So, y'all, I believe it wasn't the RTV. It was the tractor. She moved Gary's body from the tractor. Her DNA is on the shifter, okay? She moved his body. And then this whole thing about, Scott, he erased the trail cam. Now, stop and use some common sense, y'all. If Scott Farris did this, murdered his father and tried to cover it up, he had to erase that trail cam. Does he not know that it's showing him actually deleting it? I mean, would he not know, this is a trail cam and you would think he would have removed that trail cam before or even after, instead of just deleting it and letting it stay up there with him walking up to it with his picture of it. I think, I'm going to get away with the perfect crime. I'm going to, go over here. I'm going to delete this trail cam so nobody knows what really happened. But they're going to look at that trail cam and they're going to see that it was me that deleted it. That's going to look suspicious as hell. But, I'm not going to remove the trail cam or anything like that. And, I'll just tell them, hey, this is what I've always done. And they're going to accept that. Y'all, give me a break. Scott Farris did not murder his father. He didn't. The DNA on the shifter. Melody never said anything about ever using that tractor in the days before that. The morning of the 4th, because the state contends overnight and the 3rd, somewhere between 10:30 and 12, something like that, or at least after Gary got home, before 12, that Gary was murdered. Scott left out early, got the ATM card, came back, gave it to Melody, and left. Who's to say that she even moved that body overnight that night? She had to wait till Scott left. She moved his body, took it down to the burn pile. She didn't think that it was going to get all burned up. She thought that it would look like an accident. She stuck his body in there. She didn't even leave the RTV or the tractor down there to make it look like that Gary had been down there tending it. But she did go down there with Gary's phone. And Gary was not alive during that time. Gary's phone tracks to the burn pile the morning of the 4th. And Gary is already dead. Gary was not still alive going to the burn pile. Okay? Some people would say, well, KJ, Gary went down there the morning of the 4th. Everything was fine and dandy. Forget the fact that at 2 o'clock in the morning, of the 3rd through the 4th, that Melody's telling Rusty that he's on the burn pile. Let's forget about that. That never happened. Let's say Gary wasn't murdered on the 3rd. He actually was murdered that morning after Scott went, got the money, came back, gave Melody the card, and left. Melody knew that Gary went down to the burn pile down there. She walked over there, took the gun, and shot him there. I'll tell you what, Radjo says, KJ, this is almost the only possible theory. This case is so convoluted, I need all the help I can get figuring this one out. I bet the jury is struggling too. Okay, how about this, Radjo? Any theory at this point is up for debate. But what I am saying is from my theory, it does not matter to me. You know what I mean. I respect the fact that Gary Farris was murdered. It hurts my feelings. I hate it for his family and friends and colleagues. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that it wouldn't have mattered to me if there was some evidence that Scott did it. I would be right there. It's not that I've got daggers for Melody Farris. What I am saying is that why would Martha Jane come in like that and testify about a gun? What, she's mad at Rusty and Melody because she didn't know about their affair? This woman would be willing to throw Melody Farris into prison because she's that upset with her? No. But then this question is, well, she knew. Martha Jane knew since 2016 that the gun was missing. Why wasn't there a police report? Why wasn't there anything about that? Why? She knew it was missing since 2016. She told somebody. They're now since deceased. But if this gun was a sentimental gun that her dearly beloved departed husband who died and all that gave her years ago, why wouldn't she file a police report? Again, I believe Martha Jane. I believe her, but I also believe Martha Jane, I think she knows more than she's letting on. I don't think that she knew that Melody and Rusty, I don't think Rusty planned anything. I think Rusty wanted to be with Melody. I think he was pussy whooped. But I don't think that Martha Jane thought that, oh, I know that Melody's going to go kill Gary. I don't think that at all. I want to get to this thing about the jury that sent the notes. The jury sent out notes because we don't know what the jury's thinking. And I don't believe they're going to come up with a verdict today. I think I was listening to Eric on the docket. He said by Monday, he thinks. And I kind of want to agree with that. I could be wrong. I hope they come up with a verdict today. Everybody does. But I want to talk to y'all about these two notes during deliberations. And those two notes were calls with Melody and Rusty. Rusty asked for corroboration of Melody's statement. So they're not asking anything about Scott. Okay? They're not, in that right there, they're only looking at Melody and Rusty's conversations. So they're zeroing in. I do not believe that the jury thinks that Scott Farris did anything. There are people on YouTube and other social media platforms that think Scott Farris did, in fact, get away with the perfect murder and all that. But let's just think about that. If Scott Farris, I'm going to get away with the perfect murder so that my mom can go off to prison for the murder of my father, and somehow that's going to benefit me financially and all of that. That don't make sense. Because yes, the money would go to him and his siblings, but the farm would have to be what, y'all? Just as the farm was sold. Scott Farris did not want to leave that farm. Scott Farris wanted to live on that farm. That was where he wanted to be. He made statements. One day that farm could be his. So, and maybe that was wrong of him to do that. Maybe some people would take it that, oh, Scott wanted that farm all to himself. Well, murdering your father and blaming your mother for that is not going to get you that farm. And in fact, there's 3 other siblings you got to deal with. And besides that, Melody Farris could be found not guilty, which I highly doubt. But what if? That's a roll of the dice. In part of Georgia law, if she was found convicted of murder, she wouldn't get anything. But what if she wasn't found guilty? What if she only gets found guilty of concealing a body or lying to police? Well, she gets money. So you would have to believe that Scott Farris thought shooting his dad would benefit him more financially than the way the arrangement was there. And Scott Farris knew damn well that Gary Farris had it. He was looking more about the fact that, oh, Dad and my mom are possibly going to go and get a divorce. And they're going to be fighting over all this stuff. So he's going to kill his dad? It would seem to me that Scott Farris, if it's all about wanting to keep the farm, and he wants the money, that he would have taken his mother out, because it would take just as much hatred and malice to shoot your parent, your father, as it would be your mother, regardless of what the relationship was. But see, here's the difference. Melody Farris absolutely loathed Gary Farris. She didn't want to be with him. Why wouldn't she just leave Gary Farris and be with Rusty? Why wouldn't she do that? Rusty gave her a credit card. But Rusty didn't have the kind of money that Gary Farris had. And she hated it. She hated it that she was being put on a leash. And yet, while she's being put on a leash, after 39 years of marriage, her kids have a nice loose leash where they can take beach trips and get money from dad anytime they pretty well want to. Y'all, at this point, Gary Farris was not going to listen to Melody Farris when Melody Farris has stopped giving them money. And Gary Farris was at a point, it's proved in the evidence, there's nothing Melody Farris could have done if he'd have come home from the restaurant that night and she'd have been in a sexy teddy saying, "Oh, Gary, I just want to start over, Gary. I love you so much. I'm so sorry what happened years ago. Gary," she could have put on the act of her life, and I guarantee you, Gary Farris wouldn't have taken the bait. He knew she was unhinged. She knew it. He knew it, excuse me. They sent out those notes to jury members. Rusty's interview with Detective Pope, original statement about the comment on the burn pile. Again, y'all, if anyone thinks that Rusty Barton is just I'm going to make it up. I'm going to make it up so I can get out of trouble. Folks, that don't make sense. If Rusty Barton knew he did nothing wrong, and it's proven that he was in Tennessee, he could have held on to his guns. He sure as hell wasn't scared of getting in any trouble when he recanted it a year later. Wasn't he concerned? I'm gonna help Melody. I didn't actually say that. But at the time, they were threatening to arrest me, and they were talking about the death penalty. But during this year, I realized that, they really have nothing on me. So I guess, the day before I meet with them, while I'm on the phone with, and me and Melody start talking again and stuff, I'm just going to go into that and I'm going to tell him I'm recanting. His attorney was with him that whole year and could have said even a week, a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. Rusty, I'm your attorney, and if you didn't really hear her say that on the phone, you need to tell them the truth. His attorney knows, absolutely knows, through their own private communications, which those can't be bared out in court. That's attorney-client privilege there. That Rusty Barton, during that whole year before recanting, never told his attorney, I didn't really say that. I really didn't hear her say that. And really, ultimately, what it comes down to is this: why in the hell should it matter that when Melody and Rusty are on the phone and she says, "Well, did you tell them that you'd been drinking and had the Tylenol pins and all that?" Think about that, y'all. Think about that. The audio played in closing, but the full call between Melody and Rusty. Again, this is Melody and Rusty. This has nothing to do with Scott. If there was anything in their notes, if they're zeroing in on, we've got, there's some reasonable doubt here. Scott could have done this. We need to really explore this. They would have been asking him more about Scott. How far back were Gary's emails checked for straight talk charges? This is important, y'all, because that is a bombshell revelation that Melody Farris on July 4th went to Walmart and purchased those minutes for her other phone, not the one that Gary knew about, the other phone. And if she would have done that on that credit card, he would have got those. And he would have been like, "What number is this? What burner phone is this?" And, my wife's a floozy in the past, so maybe this means she's talking to somebody else. She knew Gary Farris was dead. She knew it. That, y'all, is the most important thing in terms of her state of mind at the time that proves she's guilty. Now, she could have known he was dead when she got those straight talk minutes, and her and Scott was in cahoots and all this and that. Again, y'all, none of it. You try to think about, Gary comes home about 9:30ish, 10 o'clock in the evening after being at the restaurant. It's proven that Scott doesn't get home till 11:30. You know, unless you want to get out here on a limb and say, well, maybe Scott left his phone up there at that place, up at the lake up there, and came home and did the deed, and Melody knew nothing about it, and all that, y'all. Melody Farris shot Gary Farris in the house. Were deleted emails checked for Straight Talk wireless charges? Was a travel CPAP ever found? I was thinking about that because they had testimony about the CPAP and how the last time he used it, he didn't use it the night of July the 3rd. He never went to bed with it on because he was murdered that night. That's why they're narrowing it all down, which again, if some people think, well, Gary's phone the next morning on the 4th shows it going toward the burn pile. He didn't wear a CPAP machine that night? He just decided that night not to wear it. Give me a break, y'all. That was Melody Farris taking that phone out there to create the illusion that Gary went out to the burn pile. She wasn't thinking about the CPAP machine and how it would have evidence of last use or anything like that. So when you're talking about a travel CPAP, I'm just trying to figure out if that means that maybe Gary had a different CPAP machine with him and somehow that got disposed of, or maybe it didn't. Maybe it was still in the house, and the one that was introduced as evidence showing the night of July 3rd, it had not been used. It maybe because he used the other one. It's the only thing I can come up with. Was the device picking up Google pings for Gary? Was the device picking up Google pings for Gary? I'm not really sure if there's a different way that you can GPS people. If Google could do that through Google Maps, whether his location notification had to have been on, right? Because they have it the next morning on July 4th, him going out to the burn pile. The AT&T Verizon tower data. What was, we don't know if they were trying to get in on Gary and Melody's, their phone providers, or whether they were thinking about Scott. And these just really are, y'all. These are just these circumstantial things, such as Rusty Barton's internet searches included. If the police have a cell phone number, can they get all of your text messages? I don't remember, and I'll have to go back and look at that. When did it had to have been after the murder, right? But how long after the murder? Plain gold rings, and how police get your text messages. Well, if he's asking how do police get your text messages, the fact is some text messages were deleted. I haven't watched this trial from beginning to end, so I don't know if there was testimony that they could show on like a report or whatever. Yes, text messages were deleted, and we don't know what those are. But the question is was he asking these questions because after Gary was murdered? Because if they're questions before Gary was murdered, that would explain because he was having an affair with Gary's wife, Melody. But if it was afterwards, does this point to Rusty being guilty of anything? No, but Rusty's out to be the hero for Melody. He's trying to figure out, is Melody going to get busted? before the bullet was found in the basement, a projectile embedded in Gary Farris's rib, and any blood found in the home, Melody Farris's sons, Chris and Scott, talked to the police about a missing gun, a tractor parked in a weird way, and their mother having their father's wallet in hand. So Melody Farris, she wanted it to look like Gary Farris had an accident in the burn pile, obviously, because Gary Farris did not walk over to the burn pile on July 4th. So, did she think that that bullet was going to get burned up? I mean, is that what she thought? The bullet was never going to, that they wouldn't take it that far? They would say, oh, he fell in the burn pile, and we're not going to do anything further about this. That's interesting. And Chris and Scott talking about a gun missing. The question is, if you want to believe that Scott's saying that a gun is missing and Chris is saying there's a gun missing, then you would have to believe that Chris and Scott both were in on all this. And they're going to frame Melody. A cell phone tower up near the Farris's Purcell Lane home shows the last phone and data location for Gary Farris's phone ended on July 4th, 2018 at 6:24 p.m. Prosecutors and law enforcement contend that Gary Farris was murdered on July 3rd of 2018 around 10 p.m. Right, Canyon Jam. If people want to believe that Scott Farris had this elaborate frame job for his mama there, you know, on one hand they want to say Scott Farris was hot-tempered and it just got out of hand and he shot Gary and, oh my God, I killed my father and I've got to frame my mother and I'm going to have to put him on the burn pile. My mother can't know nothing about this, according to how Melody Farris is saying. Oh, Scott had the perfect plan because I knew nothing about it. I was upstairs changing the sheets. I was in the bathroom. I never heard nothing. Have you ever heard, Rusty, that you put a gun to somebody and that's why you can't hear the gunshot? Why couldn't she have said, this was the perfect plan, Rusty? Scott must have shot him out at the barn and that's why I didn't hear it. No, she knew. She absolutely knew that he was shot in the house because she's the one that shot him. And she did it out of a fit of rage. And she had already, in my view, she already had known that he was tending that fire was going. That, you know, even if it wasn't like super high or anything, it was already, Gary Farris had already tended to it before July 3rd. It had been going. It wasn't like it was started on the 3rd or started on the 4th. It had already been smoking. So she knew that this was going to, she had to make it look like an accident. She had to make it look like an accident because of what? Accidental policy insurance stuff. It would also keep her out of trouble. Does anyone believe that Melody Farris would be in cahoots with Scott when all she ever did was complain about Scott and how Scott, you know, was living off of him and getting the money? She knew that morning on July 4th when Scott Farris came and knocked on that door at 6 o'clock in the morning, she was up. It ain't like she had to roll out. She knew he was coming that morning to get that card because that was the way it had always been. He'd already had plans to go to this place. She knew about it. She knew that he would have to come and get some money. And she had to make it look just as normal as possible. If she was so concerned about Gary giving all this money and Gary's tired of Scott stealing his money, Why would she come to the door and just hand him the car? No, she didn't actually hand it to him at the door. She went out to the vehicle and got it for him and handed it to him. Without what, y'all? Going and saying, Gary, I'm tired of it. Scott's is coming over here. He's knocking on the door, Gary. You go give him the money, Gary. Because she knew Gary was dead. If she was so damn tired of Scott taking the credit card, doing what he was doing, she wouldn't have come to the door. She'd have told him, F you. She would have said, no, you're not. The day before, I'm putting an end to this once and for all. I'm putting an end to this once and for all. She knew the pattern. She knew how Scott would get the card. She understood that's how it was supposed to be. Because if she did keep that card from Scott Farris, what would happen? Scott would call his dad, right? Or text his dad and say, Mom won't give me the credit card. And then what would happen? Gary and Melody would get in a fight because Gary would say, that's my money. I'm giving it to Scott. What? Melody Farris is going to give Scott Farris Gary's credit card without Gary's permission. She's just going to do that, right? No. She knew that she had to go out to the truck and get that credit card for Scott at 6 o'clock in the freaking morning because she had to make things look normal, like the normal way it always was. Because she knew that Scott thought that Gary was there downstairs, whether asleep or whatever. His vehicle was in the driveway. She knew that Scott knew that Gary was there, and she had to get Scott to go get your money, bring me the car back, and go do your thing so that I can do mine. Melody Farris absolutely murdered Gary Farris. She absolutely did it. And when it originally happened, if you'll look at the evidence and all that, you'll see she never pointed anything to anyone at the beginning. She didn't tell police Scott did anything or anything like that. She talked about Gary being suicidal. She talked about other things, but she never immediately, if her plan was to frame Scott for all of this, she would have immediately, Scott did it. Scott did it. And then on the other side of that, people say, well, KJ, it seems Scott was ready right off the bat. Well, folks, Scott lived there. He understood this animosity and hatred that Melody had toward Gary. Who else would have done something like that? It really comes down to the behaviors a few days before that happened and whether the pattern had shifted or changed. Scott's plans, he'd always done these things. This wasn't Scott, I'm gonna go to the golf course and up to the lake so I'll have an alibi and all that. And somehow, I'm not going to worry about it. Mom's at home. She might go out there and find Dad. And all, y'all, it does not make sense that Scott Farris did any of this. So, ultimately, I will summarize it as this. According to the evidence that I have looked over and all of the witnesses and all the exhibits that I have, and I might have missed some. The bottom line is that I believe that Gary came home that evening. Melody and him got into an argument. Perhaps the animals were out at one point and she got them back in. And when Gary got home, she was pissed because Scott's out. Scott gets money out of the ATM, gets to go and play golf and do all these things. She's tired of it. The horses are getting out and all that. She's telling Gary, I'm sick of it. All you do is give the kids money. I'm sick of all of this, and this is not going to stand. And she absolutely shot him. He ran downstairs or made his way downstairs, and she absolutely shot him again. He fell out onto the floor and died. I'm not sure if I don't believe for 1 second from there she immediately went and got the tractor or anything. I think she went and got the RTV, or I believe it was the tractor though, when Scott left to go that day. And she loaded his body up. She took something and got him out that side door downstairs, then got the tractor, brought it around, loaded him up. Her DNA's on the shifter. The blood of Gary's on the tractor. And she took him over to the burn pile. She put his body on the burn pile. She didn't leave the tractor there like she's just stupid because she didn't leave an RTV or a tractor down there making it look like Gary went down there on that. Then she absolutely had Gary's phone at that time that she had taken him down to the burn pile to create an illusion that Gary was going to the burn pile and that he accidentally died in it. She didn't think nobody would find the evidence of anything, that anyone would do an autopsy or anything like that. She came back. She went. Well, she tried to think everything was fine. Then she goes to meet Amanda. And then then she's like, oh, I've got to make it look like Scott was here at least that evening and all that. Well, what time would Scott have gotten home had she not called him about the animals? Would he have come home at all? Would he have stayed up at the lake? That's a question that I never got an answer for. If Melody Farris didn't call Scott and say, the horses are out, you need to come home, what would have happened? What time would have Scott actually come home? And really, ultimately, it comes down to this. Melody Farris was up at least till 2 o'clock in the morning. And think about that. She's on the phone with Rusty till 2 in the morning. It's bared out. But yet, 3, 4, 5, 6, 4 hours later, she's answering the door to go out to her truck to give Scott the credit card. She never went to bed that night. She never did. And she had to do what she had to do in her own mind. Because she didn't think that this was all going to be put off on her, and she didn't think it was going to be put off on Scott or anyone else. She didn't think anyone was going to call it a homicide. Because he'd been in the hospital. He'd had spells, and that's how they were going to chalk it off. That's the way her police interview played out on the 5th. She couldn't believe it that they had found that bullet. And I'll tell you something. This woman was very meticulous about cleaning, but she didn't have time, y'all. She didn't have time to look at every single spot downstairs. She missed the bullet, and there was really nothing she could do about the blood on the carpet, because what are you supposed to do to get the blood off the carpet? And if she'd have done that, I mean, it didn't look like it was fresh, but I don't know, y'all. I just don't see that she would have left something a few days before, blood on a carpet from a dog bite. She would have done something about that. Yes. You see, she thought it would look like an accident. Kathy Mama Bear says she had to make sure Scott wouldn't be there when that went down. So when we're talking about motive, means, and opportunity, the major question, y'all, who stood to benefit the most in all of this? And why would Scott murder his father if it was all about getting the farm or getting the money? When Scott murdered Gary, if Gary was the gold goose, why wouldn't Scott just murder his mother? Then he wouldn't have to worry about that. I mean, if he's such a hot-tempered person and it led to a hypothesis of him killing his own father, well, you would think that it would be so much easier to kill Melody Farris than it would Gary Farris and throw her body on a burn pile. Says motive, means, and opportunity spells Melody. Canyon Jam says whoever files for divorce about give up 95% of the marital assets. Now that would be good motive to make it work. Good point. Catbo says hydrogen peroxide gets blood out of fabric. You think Melody Farris knew that? Y'all would have to believe, y'all. Now think about this. Y'all would have to believe that Scott Farris actually took a bullet, a spent bullet, and put Gary's blood on it and put it downstairs and hope that Melody Farris wouldn't see that. This woman was meticulous. So, anyway, leave your comments, all of that good stuff. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Y'all, we're going to get together tomorrow evening, hopefully. If not, it'll be Sunday. We got some other things we want to go over concerning Tim Ballard and also Donna Adelson's new defense team. How long is this going to take for that to kick in? And perhaps by the end of the day, I doubt it, but they'll have something on Melody Farris. But even then, the only reason I even brought up this case was for motive, means, and opportunity. Just to remind everyone that it's a lot more than just, somebody wishing somebody dead. There has to be absolutely all these things. And you know what? If Scott Farris wouldn't have said, Scott and Chris Farris hadn't said something about a missing gun and this whole situation with Melody having an affair with Rusty and stuff, I don't know that, I don't know if that was said before they decided to do an autopsy or whether they were going to do one regardless. But it was planned in that Melody had thought about, if I ever kill Gary, this is what I'm going to do. But I don't think that evening when she shot him, I don't think she had thought it through completely, because the only thing I could say about her not thinking it through completely is that she really believed that they wouldn't go any further than thinking it was an accident, because if she had thought it through, she would have understood they're going to find out about Rusty. They're going to find out all this other stuff, like me getting these minutes on this burner phone. They're going to find out all these things, but she just thought it was going to be an accident, that they were going to think it was an accident. So anyway, she didn't think it through at all, Monique Dawn. Yeah, Cat Mole, he's up shit creek without a paddle, Tim Ballard is. I had told y'all things were about to go down, and I'm telling you, it's this federal lawsuit is going to expose him with a lot of other people involved. So anyway, I love you all. I hope y'all have a great weekend. Thank y'all for being here. I know I had not said that I was going to do anything on Melody Farris, even though I have been very fascinated with her in this case. And, some say that she won't get convicted of the serious crimes, that she will get convicted of concealment and lying to police. But how can that be, y'all? How could she get concealment and lying to police if she was not involved at all? What, after the fact, Scott came to her and said, Mom, I did this. I was hot-tempered at the time, but Mom, please. No, she wouldn't have. She would have immediately said, he did it. She would have called the police as soon as, if her and Scott had been in cahoots and Scott did that, she would have immediately turned on him. Someone said, well, Scott saw an opportunity. Him and his mom was in cahoots, but he saw an opportunity where he could get all the money. And so he was going to make it look like he didn't know nothing about it, and he was going to blame his mom. Y'all, would Scott Farris be that deviant, or would Melody Farris be that deviant? Think about that. Scott Farris and Melody Farris, both mother and son, had this idea to get rid of Gary. And then what happens? Scott decides, oh, you know what? I could get all the money and blame it all on Mom. Or do you think it would be Melody? You know what? Me and Scott were in on all this, but not at any time really at the beginning did I even say anything about Scott. And the only time I really even brought Scott into it was after I'd gotten arrested. That Scott has the perfect plan and all this, the perfect crime and all this and that. Y'all, Scott and Melody Farris did not do anything together Scott did not murder his father. Melody Farris did this out of a heat of passion, fit of rage, whatever. And then she tried to cover it up. And she didn't think nobody would find out about it. So that's my theory. And again, who says I'm right? Who am I anyway, right? I love you all. Have a great weekend. You know, when it comes down to it, justice through understanding means a lot of things to a lot of different people. So with that being said, I love you and keep on looking.